There's different translations, but roughly it means work hard, leave luck to heaven.
Which is super interesting, because I don't think a lot of people think about where the name Nintendo came from.
Greatness always starts with an idea. The idea should remain malleable to create something of longevity. It is ever-changing and yet remains faithful to its core values. To bring positive change, to bring hope, to bring fun.
Well, I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like 2, 1, game, begin.
And usage by the Yakuza.
Nintendo is one of the world's biggest gaming companies. They're a Japanese company and they've actually been going for well over 100 years now. They started making playing cards, but they really reached their stride in the 80s and 90s when they started releasing arcade machines and then home consoles. And that was about the same time as well when we got introduced to their biggest franchises like Mario and Luigi, Legend of Zelda and Kirby.
As you can see, they're a bit smaller than the Western playing cards that we're used to, and they're printed with beautiful flower patterns and scenes from nature.
Nintendo's earliest and best customers were the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza. They ran lots of illegal gambling dens and they needed playing cards. And because no one wanted cheating going on, every game started with a new pack of cards. So Nintendo had a great business early on because these gangsters would buy cards, they'd open the cards, play a game, throw them away, get a new set of playing cards. So it was a good business to get into.
Yamauchi found great success in his newfound company. Before long, he had established a new shop in Osaka and began to develop a more comprehensive array of card games. It was in 1929 when Yamauchi decided to step down from the company, passing the business to his son-in-law Sekiryo Kaneda, who adopted the name Sekiryo Yamauchi in respect of the family. Fusajiro remained uninvolved with the company for the remainder of his life, eventually passing away from a stroke in his home city of Kyoto on January 1st, 1940.
The founder of the company continued until 1929 when his son-in-law, Sekiryo Kaneda, who took the name Yamauchi as well, took over the company and kind of professionalized it, improved the manufacturing processes, and started manufacturing Western-style playing cards.
War has struck again.
After World War II, Japan was in ruins. It was US occupied. There wasn't much food. The buildings were flattened, and the country had to rebuild from absolute scratch. And from that came this kind of, essentially a new start. It tried to move into electronics, and that was really kind of where Japan found a new future post-war.
The years following World War II allowed Japan to further its industrialization. Markets for electronics were established alongside the rise of strip mills for iron and steel. Among such technological innovations were transfer machines for the automobile industry, automatic control systems in new steam power stations, and catalytic cracking in oil refining industries.
Yakihabara is an electronics district in Tokyo, and it became like the hub of electronics shops. You'd have these kind of multi-story arcades and shops selling all kinds of electronics. It was really a very geeky mecca, if you like. If you were into electronics and you were in Tokyo, you're going to make a beeline for that area.
After the death of Sekiryo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, the grandson of Fusajiro, was ordered to step up and assume the mantle of company president. Being young and inexperienced, Hiroshi suffered some initial backlash from the company's employees.
In 1949, Sekiryo became ill, called up his grandson to his hospital bed, and said, "Okay, you give up your law degree and take over Nintendo from me." That was Hiroshi Yamauchi. And over the course of the next 50 years, he was destined to turn Nintendo into a multinational conglomerate. But at the beginning, it wasn't so easy.
Strikes would take place to test the new president's dedication to the role, and firmly, Hiroshi would make a stand. He chose to fire a handful of employees and set his eyes on the future. With a traditional imperialist demeanor, Hiroshi ran the company intending to keep up with the changing times. The first step was to develop a new style of plastic playing cards influenced by Western markets. However, due to Japan's strict restrictions on unsanctioned gambling, the plastic and Hanafuda cards were now struggling to make a profit. Luckily, the company, now called Nintendo Karuta, made a licensing deal with Walt Disney to merge the new plastic cards into family-oriented games. With a small booklet outlining the many games one could play with the cards, the new product would sell 600,000 units in 1 year, allowing Nintendo to dominate the card game market in its own country.
They also had a deal with Disney that allowed them to make Disney playing cards
that had Disney characters on them. And so this sort of made Nintendo kind of take a little sidestep into manufacturing things for children, wherein they discovered, hey, there's a lot of money to be made here. And so that was another stepping stone on the way to them creating video games, which at that time were basically considered toys.
Once again, the company name was changed to the Nintendo Company Limited, and the business was made public with Hiroshi Yamauchi as its chairman.
So at the beginning, Hiroshi Yamauchi was only 21 years old, and the workers in Nintendo didn't necessarily take him entirely seriously. He was really ambitious and really ruthless. He fired anyone that disagreed with him.
Visiting Cincinnati in the United States provided Hiroshi with some disappointing yet valuable information. He'd gone to examine the world's largest manufacturer of playing cards, the U.S. Playing Card Company. However, on his arrival, a small office and factory greeted him. To Hiroshi, the scale of the facility represented the success of the playing card industry, and there wasn't much to be seen. Concerned for the company's future, Hiroshi returned to Japan in search of new ways to ensure the longevity of Nintendo.
After Nintendo had established themselves making these playing cards, they tried a bunch of different things before they landed on what would eventually make them so successful. So they tried a whole range of different companies, including taxis and even love hotels.
He went into the food business, making instant rice, and he went into the taxi business. And that one seemed to go okay until there was a labor revolt, and that was the end of that idea.
So by the early 70s, Nintendo was struggling. It spent a fortune trying all these businesses, getting nowhere, and had a lot of debt.
The outlandish ventures proved unsuccessful for the business and were soon disbanded. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Desperately searching for ideas, Hiroshi spotted a factory engineer called Gunpei Yokoi.
Around that time, Hiroshi visited one of the factories and saw Gunpei playing with an extendable claw, a toy which he'd invented himself. And instead of telling him off for that, he was fascinated by this and asked him to put these extendable claws into manufacture.
The Ultra Hand was distributed and became a massive hit. Such simplistic ingenuity spurred new ideas for the company. Soon, a toy department was made in Kyoto, solely led by Gunpei, who would develop new concepts such as the Love Tester and the Light Gun. By the 1960s, Nintendo had solidified itself as a significant player in the toy market. The early 70s came rolling in, and with it, the idea of a video game was being conceptualized.
Around that time, in the early 70s, video games were becoming a really big thing. Pong had come out in 1972, and suddenly video games were cool.
Atari became the first in the race, releasing Pong in 1972. It was inspired by a game developed by physicist William Higginbotham. Atari leapt towards mainstream distribution, giving the public a groundbreaking discovery which took America by storm. Nintendo had to react fast. Hiroshi hired employees from Sharp Electronics to develop a new system that could compete with the emerging video game consoles. Soon, in cooperation with Mitsubishi Electric, the TV Color 6 was made and distributed in June 1977.
So after Nintendo had been going for quite a long time, they really started to branch out into the burgeoning gaming world. So at the time, arcade machines were hugely popular around the world. Atari had already been producing them for quite a while. Classics like Pong had been around for a little bit of time, but they were really starting to take off in Japan, in America, and in Europe. So Nintendo decided that they would try and get in on this really expanding market as well. And when they did, they really worked on how they were going to make a game that would stand out.
But it wasn't actually meant to be Nintendo's console. Mitsubishi had created it for another company that went bust and decided to give Nintendo a call, see if they'd put it out instead. And that's how Nintendo got into video games.
So Nintendo's very first console, a games console, was actually the Color TV game. It was a very, very simple device, but it paved the way. I think Shigeru Miyamoto, who would go on to make some of Nintendo's most important games, did actually work on the Color TV game. I think he designed like the outer casing or something really random like that. So it paved the way for one Shigeru Miyamoto to then go on to design Donkey Kong.
In response, Atari returned with the 2600, popularizing microprocessor-based hardware and games stored on swappable ROM cartridges. It was the most popular second-generation console by a large margin during the time of release. Nintendo would follow with 4 more iterations of the TV Color, and soon both Atari and Nintendo were being recognized as big fish in a huge pond, and competitiveness was on the rise.
テレビから遊べるテレビへ15種類ものゲームが楽しめるカラーテレビゲーム15
In response to America's growing arcade market, Hiroshi expanded Nintendo into the US, releasing new titles such as Radar Scope, Space Fever, and Sheriff. Though effective in the Japanese market, the games weren't financially successful in America. To counter this, Hiroshi turned to Shigeru Miyamoto, and upon deliberation, Donkey Kong was made, becoming a smash hit in both countries.
The arcade machine that they came out with was Donkey Kong, which is obviously one of their most famous franchises, and starred the main character of Jumpman, who was originally actually a carpenter, but he would eventually become our most beloved Nintendo character, Mario, who's actually a plumber now. But the idea was that as he was a carpenter, the level was based around kind of like a workman sort of environment, where he's dodging barrels from a big gorilla, also called Donkey Kong. And this just took off across the world. It was a really fantastic arcade machine, and kids loved to play it. And that was really the start of how Nintendo managed to dominate the gaming market at that time.
So Shigeru Miyamoto is probably one of the most important video game designers there's ever been. He is a producer, a creative director, a game developer, a game designer, and he created much of Nintendo's early output. So he created Mario, he created Donkey Kong, he created The Legend of Zelda. So his contribution to the games industry really can't be understated.
He's kind of like the Michelangelo of video games, if you like. He joined Nintendo out of art school and really all kind of, the whole Nintendo style as we know it really kind of emerged from him and what he did. And he always wanted to make games that appeal to everyone. They were never aimed at kids, they were never aimed purely at adults. It was about games for everyone to enjoy and games that were very much about joy, and happiness. It was kind of a very kind of bright, optimistic kind of style people. Optimistic kind of style people.
Hiroshi instituted 3 separate innovation and development facilities under the Nintendo banner. This unique method would allow each department to outplay the other within the company, constantly guaranteeing new innovative results. In 1979, Gunpei Yokoi conceived the idea of a handheld video game while sitting on the bullet train on a business trip.
So around 1979, the story goes that Gunpei was commuting and he saw on the train Japanese businessmen playing with LCD calculators.
At that time, you have to remember, there's not much entertainment you can carry with you. You can have a newspaper, a magazine, a book. If you don't have any of those, you can stare out the window. So there's not much choice of what to do. And he notices further down the carriage, there's this guy with a pocket calculator, which is, pretty high tech for the late 70s. And he's just playing around with the calculator to pass the time. And so Gunpei kind of thinks, hang on, what if I took technology of a pocket calculator, turned it into a game? That would be something people could take and it could kind of help commuters on their boring journeys have something fun to do.
And thus he created the Game & Watch.
Nintendo first entered the kind of handheld gaming world with the Game & Watch, which was kind of an LED games console, not even what we would consider a console today, really. Each of them was only preloaded with one game, so you couldn't put multiple games into that console. But it was still really popular. People liked having a handheld gaming device to take with them.
The 70s would become known as the golden age of arcade games. People crowded around machines, placing coins on the screen to reserve their turn. The 80s came rolling in, and with it, a massive advancement in gaming technology. But with it came many more consoles manufactured to capitalize on the rise of gaming. From Palm clones to home computers, most of which weren't functioning as promised. Before long, the market was saturated in off-brand consoles, and choosing one which worked as intended became a minefield. This climate would be known as the video game crash, aka the Atari shock.
In the 80s, video games felt like they were just reaching new heights and just getting more and more popular. But then actually there was something that's known as the video game crash. What had happened was a lot of companies were just churning out kind of lower quality games really quickly to try and hit that market and make money out of it, basically. So this led to a crash where people didn't really have faith in video games for a little while. Nintendo introduced a thing called the seal of quality, which just meant that they were going to guarantee that the games they were producing were going to reach a really high quality level, and meant that people could have faith in the games they were buying again.
The year is 1983, summer in Japan. The video game recession is at its height, with companies going bankrupt and global video game stock depleting by almost 97%. After years of work, Nintendo released a product which would change the video game climate forever. It is called the Famicom, known to the West as the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Okay.
Nintendo, a quick-loading cartridge system with over 60 of the hottest titles ever. Games like Batman, a life and death struggle to end the evil Joker's reign of terror and save Gotham City. Games games like Super Mario Brothers, a battle to rescue the Mushroom Princess from the evil Koopa Turtles. Go for the joystick for extra control, or go to infrared for remote control. The hottest games are on Nintendo, the world's #1 game system.
Nintendo had developed the Famicom, the family computer, and this was a video game system that had more than just one game on it. You could actually swap out the cartridges and play lots of different games on it. So Japan was protected from this international video game market crash because Nintendo was doing really well in Japan with the Famicom from 1983 to 1985.
The Famicom console was released in Japan originally and was called the Famicom, but it then came out in the US and in Europe as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES. That was their first really popular at-home console. It became the thing to have across the world, especially for kids.
But at that time, the industry was very skeptical of video games. This enormous market crash had damaged the reputation of video games. And so they went to great lengths to distinguish their new system from all of the video game consoles that had gone before. At that time, 1985, VHS and Betamax videos were cool, and so they made the Nintendo Entertainment System look like a VHS, with cassettes that went in sideways.
ファミリーコンピュータの楽しいカセット情報。シングルス、ダブルスの本格テニスをコンピュータと技くらい。
The NES became a staple for the development of video games and their longevity in an otherwise uncertain climate. The system was affordable and reliable, being marketed with the Nintendo seal of quality, countering concerns for potential faults. With the release of The Legend of Zelda and Super Metroid, Nintendo became synonymous with its characters and iconography. It also provided the public with the Zapper, the first widely distributed light gun designed for games such as Duck Hunt and Hogan's Alley. However, nothing would prepare Nintendo for what might have been its most significant decision yet. Super Mario Bros.
And really, I don't think you can mention all of those early Nintendo games without mentioning the soundtracks to them. Koji Kondo, the composer to all of those early Nintendo games, is just a master, I think, at creating those sounds and effects and melodies that just get stuck in your head forever.
Nintendo's first big success was Donkey Kong. It was a coin-operated arcade game, and that really made its name worldwide. It just became huge. It was one of the first sort of platform games. It introduced the world to Mario, or whatever it was, Jumpman at the time, and it was a big hit everywhere in the world. It was big in Japan, it was big in North America, big in Europe. So that really established Nintendo as a force of video games. And then a few years later, it brings out the Nintendo Entertainment System, its first proper home video game console, and that has Super Mario Bros., which is, a wonderful game even now, huge at the time, and that really established Nintendo as the leader of the video game market.
I mean, Nintendo became so popular around the world because of how initially simple, but how gorgeously complex and gorgeously well designed its games are. I mean, you look at things like, let's take Super Mario, the level 1-1, for example. I actually spoke years ago to Shigeru Miyamoto about how he went about creating this. In level 1-1, a player will encounter absolutely everything that they possibly need to understand how the game works. And so in subsequent levels, it's what they know, what the game can assume that they already know about it, is challenged. So the very first, little bit that Mario runs along and he jumps up and he hits the box and the mushroom comes out, it's actually very hard for a player to avoid that mushroom because the game wants you to run into it and discover Mario can make himself bigger. And that's one core mechanic of the game right there that you've discovered without any tutorials, without being told. You've just found it out for yourself. And that's the beauty of a Nintendo game. They want, I think at the core of every good Nintendo game is the joy of discovery, the joy of curiosity. And that is, I think that's inherently Shigeru Miyamoto's thing. That's the Legend of Zelda to a T. It's all about discovery. It's all about going out into the world and seeing what you can find and seeing what you can uncover.
In the late 80s, I was living in America. I didn't have a Nintendo console myself, but after school I was so excited to walk to Danny's house and play Duck Hunt with the light gun on his Nintendo Entertainment System. There was nothing more exciting. And Super Mario Brothers blew my mind.
There's just so many fascinating elements to early Nintendo design. I mean, Mario, right? Take for example Mario. Mario's got his blue overalls, he's got his red hat, he's got his mustache, he's got a big nose. All of those things that make Mario Mario were done just because it made him easier to animate. It was just cutting corners essentially. And he was blue and red so that he would stand out on the background. Number one, he had a hat so that they wouldn't have to animate any hair. He had a mustache so that you didn't have to see his mouth and he wouldn't have to talk or make sounds or do anything like that. Every little thing about that is just very clever design. And that was Miyamoto. That was early Nintendo to a T. I always remember you described Goombas as suspicious mushrooms because you have the mushrooms that let you power up and you've got one extra life. And then the Goombas are suspicious because they're a little bit shady and I always find that very funny. It's like, suspicious mushrooms. Okay, how does one go about making one of those?
In 1989, Gunpei Yokoi revealed his latest invention, the Game Boy. Released in Japan alongside Tetris, the Game Boy would birth the now $90 billion Pokemon franchise. This revolutionary console was a smash hit and began developing more complex handheld consoles.
There were handheld video game consoles that allowed you to play lots of different games by swapping cartridges, like the Atari Lynx and the Game Gear, and of course the Game Boy. The Game Boy was different to its competitors. Its competitors had color screens.
So the Game Boy was, even for 1989, quite primitive. It was black and white. Its rivals were in color. It seemed quite retro even in 1989, but because it was a handheld and it was primitive, it could use less batteries, and that meant it was far more portable and reliable. So basically, Nintendo beat much more advanced competition by having something that was much more practical.
Gunpei Yokoi's design philosophy was lateral thinking with withered technology. And what that meant is that he didn't want to design a cutting-edge video game system. He wanted to use technology that was already well used and already cheap. And that has been Nintendo's most successful design philosophy ever since.
Super Mario became loved by millions and slowly but surely sealed itself as the brand mascot for the company. When Nintendo was dominating the market, a new competitor joined the scene, Sega, with the release of the SG-1000.
It's quite expensive now, but it's better than watching TV, I think.
I'm addicted to it, Street Fighter. I like fighting and adventure. Sega's got more better games, but Nintendo's more fantasy games.
The British market alone is worth over £500 million a year. Video games outsell music CDs. And so far, there seems to be room for more than one Victor Ludorum.
In the 90s, Nintendo were right at the top of their popularity. The Game Boy was out, the Nintendo Entertainment System was out, but Sega were also hot at their heels trying to really recapture some of that market. So while Nintendo had Mario, the friendly Italian plumber, Sega had Sonic the Hedgehog, a cool blue hedgehog. And the contrast was that Mario games were often kind of seen as more family friendly, more kind of cuddly in a way, and they were quite slow paced compared to Sonic, which really sold itself on speed. So the Sonic games really positioned themselves as quite edgy, and that really spoke to a lot of teenagers and kids at the time, which meant that Nintendo and Sega ended up kind of battling it out with their mascots for console supremacy.
Danita Stokes, president of HAG.
It's bad enough that Sega Genesis has the most 16-bit games, but this new Sonic the Hedgehog, oh, he really defied doilies. They think he's incredibly fast. Well, what's the hurry, mister? And about his attitude. Smarty pants. Why can't it be more like that nice boy Mario? Oh. Little brat.
Now, get Sonic free when you buy a Sega Genesis system at its new price of $149.99.
The rivalry between Sega and Nintendo was aggressive. They really were going for it at that time. Like, they just wanted to corner the market. So Sega had a slogan on their advertising that was pretty pointed. It was, Sega does what Nintendo.
And the game mode, actually going up and saying, this is Nintendo, this is what it does, go on, have a go, what do you think? And of course, added to that, there's the imagery of Nintendo, which is very important, which the kids also find important. It's a kind of a badge brand, because there's a playground battle out there, Nintendo v Sega, and it's important to us that most kids in the playgrounds are talking about Nintendo.
Really what we have here is a format war, just like VHS and beta and video. And of course, every Nintendo sold, from our point of view, is one person out there not buying Sega software. And this market is all about razors and razor blades, if you like. In other words, we make the money on the software rather than on the hardware. So it's important that we get as big a user base out there as possible.
So Sega during the 80s was always the #2 console manufacturer, and by #2 it had 10% of the market, Nintendo had 90%. So, you know, it's not even, it's #2, but the gap is enormous. So as the 90s began, Sega gets ready its new console, the Mega Drive or the Sega Genesis, and decides it's going to fight again and try and win. And it launches a couple of years ahead of the Super Nintendo and basically markets itself at older teenagers. And with the help of Sonic, it breaks through. It sells a few million before Nintendo's even released its own console. So certainly it's gone from this kind of distant #2 to an actual serious force. And so the early 90s was kind of power struggle between Nintendo and Sega. Sega kind of aiming for a slightly older audience, Nintendo aiming for a slightly younger audience. In the end, Nintendo won out. Nintendo eventually managed to outsell Sega, but you know, it was a close run for a good couple of years.
The 90s began with the release of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Famicom, transcending from 8-bit gameplay to 16-bit. The new console found great success across seas and competed with Sega's new console, the Genesis. It was here that both Nintendo and Sega were considered at war, with Sega releasing the new hit, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Gotta go. Hey guy, you're the first serious gamer I've seen all morning. Check this out, brand new 16-bit Super Nintendo with Super Mario World. Wow! What's this one? Oh, this is a Sonic the Hedgehog from Sega Genesis. Hey, look at these radical colors, huh? Wow, Sonic's fast too. No, overheated. I like Genesis, and it costs a lot less. But kid, a bad game. I'll take Sonic and Genesis.
Sonic the Hedgehog. More action, more speed. Sega Genesis, it's a whole lot more for less.
With Super Mario 64, GoldenEye, and The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time, the Nintendo 64 saw the threshold made by the SNES, and Hiroshi looked to surpass it in a grandiose fashion. It was a statement for 3D gameplay and character maneuverability. However, though Atari had beaten Nintendo in the race for dynamic 3D gameplay, Nintendo discovered how to flawlessly execute the newfound dimensions and utilize vector models to enhance the gameplay experience.
When I was a kid, I didn't really even know that the job of game dev existed, but I've always been someone who loved to play games. When I was younger, we actually at home weren't allowed to have a Nintendo 64 or the PlayStation 1, which were the massive consoles at the time. But I had friends who did have those consoles, and I would constantly go over to their houses to play them. We also had a PC at home where I could play really chuggy games on a not very good computer.
In the mid-90s, Gunpei Yokoi was still working for Nintendo, and he wanted to develop a virtual reality system. This was way ahead of its time. He developed what eventually became the Virtual Boy, but it didn't go as planned. Nintendo didn't give him enough time to finish the development, and the final product, he wasn't happy with it at all. In the end, instead of being a portable headset like Gunpei Yokoi had envisaged, it was actually table mounted, and you played it by kind of leaning forward and looking into this lens, and you could see these 3D graphics. It was only one color, everything was red. Playing the Virtual Boy gave you massive headaches. The games were awful. It was a total flop. Gunpei Yokoi was really upset about this because this was not the system he had imagined, and as a kind of apology, he developed the Game Boy Pocket before leaving Nintendo to go off and start his own product development company.
In March 1997, the Nintendo 64 launched in Europe and sold 2.3 million units in the first year. Nintendo introduced the Rumble Pack, which enabled players to feel the realistic vibrations contained in the game. In the early 2000s, Nintendo began its expansion, establishing offices all around the globe. The following years saw the release of the GameCube, building upon the technical prowess displayed by the N64. The Game Boy would continue to undergo upgrades, and soon there would be 6 more iterations of the console, each possessing unique qualities.
So after the Game Boy had been so successful, they released the Game Boy Color, which was kind of a step up. It was smaller, it allowed you to play games in color, which was obviously really exciting. And then after that, they also released the Game Boy Advance. So they've been kind of on the Game Boy model for quite a while, and they really knew what they were doing with handheld consoles.
Not long following the release of the GameCube, Hiroshi Yamauchi stepped down as president of Nintendo. After an incredibly successful run instigating the company as a household name for tech development, Hiroshi would be replaced by Satoru Iwata. Iwata's succession would mean the end of the Yamauchi family's long-running ownership.
In the early 2000s, Satoru Iwata made some changes to the way that Nintendo was run. Hiroshi Yamauchi had always created a very competitive atmosphere, but Satoru Iwata's approach was completely different. He created a very collaborative atmosphere. Satoru Iwata's business style was very influenced by the Blue Ocean strategy. He didn't want to compete with all of these video game consoles that were at the cutting edge of graphic technology. He wanted to create a new market. He wanted to do things differently.
In 2013, Hiroshi passed away. His legacy, however, would live on. Retaining a similar presentation to the original Game & Watch, 2004 brought the release of Nintendo's highest-selling console ever, the Nintendo DS.
When the Nintendo DS came out, it had 2 screens and kind of flipped, and this meant that you were able to use the bottom screen as kind of a touch screen, and the top screen could show something completely different. So you had the same kind of controls that you did on the Game Boy, but you were able to do a lot more. Game designers were able to make games that really utilised this new tech, and that was incredibly popular. A lot of shops sold out of the Nintendo DS when it first came out. And around the same console generation, the Nintendo Wii came out.
So the Wii was really, I don't know if anyone expected it to be as successful as it was. The funny thing about the Wii was, it wasn't the franchises that Nintendo was known for that were the reason for its success. I think the real reason for the Wii success was things like Wii Sports. It was the games that your granny could play. The people that had no gaming knowledge or vocabulary whatsoever, they saw this really fun, silly thing, waggling the Wiimotes and stuff like that, like instantly. You don't have to have any gaming language at all to know how to play that. And so it opened up gaming to a whole new audience. It didn't last long because the Wii U was horribly marketed, and it couldn't really get that lightning in a bottle effect that the Wii had. But for a moment, yeah, the Wii was huge. Everyone wanted to play it. Literally everyone.
If the Nintendo DS was popular, the Nintendo Wii was wildly popular at launch. I actually worked in a game shop around that time, and we were constantly sold out of Nintendo Wiis. They really managed to corner the market on family gaming, which is something Nintendo's always been good at, but they released a lot of titles that were aimed at the whole family and not just kids. So they had things like Wii Fit and Wii Sports, which had a really low barrier to entry, and adults were often a little bit more interested in than the classic Nintendo games. And I think that meant that a lot of families saw it as a real great investment and something that they could get for the kids, but which the adults would play as well.
The DS rose to the top of the gaming world as the most popular portable console thanks to games suitable for everyone. Players all over Europe made Animal Crossing Wild World, New Super Mario Bros., and Metroid Prime Hunters bestsellers. Including Nintendogs also boosted sales as it allowed experimentation with the new voice recognition software. Games like WarioWare Smooth Moves, Endless Ocean, and Big Brain Academy Wii Degree for the Wii invited everyone to dive into the fun regardless of previous experience, while the arrival of Super Mario Galaxy and Metroid Prime 3 Corruption brought cherished Nintendo franchises back into being with the addition of new features only possible on the Wii. With the new consoles in place, the time was right to fall back from inventing new products and refining what was already made. The DS had many upgraded versions, such as the DSi and eventually the Nintendo 3DS, released in 2011.
The next console that Nintendo came up with was the Wii U, a much more powerful console with high-definition graphics. Nintendo couldn't compete with these other systems that had phenomenal graphics. Also, the name, Wii U. People just thought it was an extension of the Wii. They didn't realize it was an entirely new beast. So the Wii U did not sell well.
Yeah, the Wii U was Nintendo's worst-selling console. It was pretty much a disaster financially. It came off the back of the Wii, but people didn't really understand it as a new console. The idea was to kind of combine an iPad-like tablet with a games console, and when they were developing it, that idea was ahead of its time. By the time they released it, it was a bit dated. It looked like a kind of Fisher-Price version of the iPad. It never really quite gelled. It didn't really know what it was, and consumers looked at it when I don't know what that is or what it's about. So it was a handy step on the way to the Nintendo Switch, but as a console on its own, it just never quite clicked with anyone.
Though the new version of the Wii underperformed in sales, it provided a massive step up in graphic capabilities, an asset that went under the radar as it didn't attract the same broad audience the original Wii had done previously. The Wii U, however, was the most powerful console on the home market before the release of the PS4 and Xbox One. The gamepad was a new idea which brought the handheld advantages of the DS to a home console and paved the way for what was to come. In 2017, we were introduced to the Nintendo Switch.
So the Switch is huge. I mean, it was such a success for Nintendo because it really Nintendo took everything that it had learned from the console market, from handheld, from all its handheld expertise, everything that it had learned from the Game Boy, from the DS, from the 3DS, from everything. And it was like, why don't you take both of these and make a console that literally does both? And that was just, it's just a master move. And that's what I love about Nintendo. Nintendo doesn't really see itself as a competitor to PlayStation or Xbox. All Nintendo is interested in is interesting innovation, experimentation, and making games that are fun.
Nintendo is so known for innovating with their hardware, and the Switch was no different. All of the big console companies were coming out with innovations, but none of them were quite as different as the Switch felt. It felt like a bit of a natural progression from the Wii and the DS, but also completely new at the same time. So the thing about the Switch is it can both be a handheld console, or you can put the handheld screen into a dock that attaches to your TV and then use the controllers on the side, so it's like a home console and a handheld at the same time. And that came out with fantastic games at launch as well.
I'm the guy sitting next to your girl on the kiss cam.
And this game just got a lot more interesting.
Sheila? Mom?
Fire!
And if you don't have the right home coverage, you might have to kiss your savings goodbye. Let's go, Peter. So get all skate, save money, and be better protected from mayhem. Yeah, like me.
Bro!
Keep your next building project on track when you plan ahead with help from Hammond Lumber Company. Hammond's Home Planning Center specialists offer professional plans with customizable 3D renderings available to bring your project to life. Once your design is finalized and approved, you'll receive a full materials list. And when you buy all your materials from them, Hammond will refund your design fees. Get your building project off to the right start when you bring your vision to Hammond Lumber Company.
No ads, no withdrawal limits. Withdraw to your bank account quickly to try it out. Wake up to barista level brew, 1 cup at a time without the waste. Add beans, pick your strength, choose your size, press brew, and let it do the rest. The built-in grinder makes grinding beans easy. Customize cup size. Choose iced or hot coffee. Full, fresh flavor, no pods. The Cuisinart Grind and Brew single serve. 1 cup, no pods, no compromises. That's a work at Cuisinart.
No matter where you live across the country, you can earn an affordable degree online from Southern New Hampshire University.
I'm the first in my family to go to college.
I have 4 kids and I wanted them to see me earn this degree.
SMHU is committed to your success. If you're thinking about going back to school, you can do it.
I'm very proud to be here today. It's nice to see all the families happy for their loved ones.
I'm very proud of you. I am so proud of you.
I love you.
I love you. Visit smhu.edu.
I'm a massive fan of Mario games. I never really played Zelda much when I was a kid, but I have to say, Zelda Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time. It's incredible, and that really helped to sell Switches.
Does the Nintendo Switch hold up in terms of graphical capability when put alongside the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X? No, but is it unbelievably fun? Do people love it? Do people take it everywhere they go? Absolutely. It has it doesn't really suffer all that much for the amount of games that it has access to. Nintendo's third-party support has actually never been better, and a very friendly third-party development platform. It was just a bit more difficult to get games onto Nintendo consoles than it was for PlayStation and Xbox, but the Switch is just fantastic. You can slot it into its port or to its dock. You can pick up where you left off seamlessly from where you were out and about. You can transition from being out playing your console on the train or wherever, to going indoors, slotting it in, and there it is, exactly where you were before. It's the perfect console, I think, for a lot of kids and adults alike, because if you don't have the time or the inclination to sit down in front of a PC or a console in front of a TV in the evening, you want to just, I don't know, get into bed and play your Switch, that's absolutely a thing you can do.
The Switch was an amalgamation of everything Nintendo had achieved thus far, merging the idea of a home console with a handheld device. The system was versatile, ergonomic, and capable of handling the stories the company wanted to tell.
Nintendo has always been a pioneer in the gaming world. One of the things that they do that is fantastic is they have a real focus on family gaming, and that's allowed them to stand out from the crowd sometimes when the other companies are doing something a little bit different. They're really invested in making games that are fun and creative and that everyone can play. And the other thing they do is that their consoles and their hardware is always new and always interesting. Sometimes it doesn't land as well, but when it does, it absolutely blows everything else away when it comes to innovation.
It was really Satoru Iwata professionalized Nintendo's merchandising arm and expanded into other areas and created a Nintendo theme park in Japan, and there's now another one in America, and of course the Super Mario Brothers film, which I'm very excited about. One of the reasons I really love Nintendo games is that all of the games on the other consoles really focus on guns and violence and crime. And I mean, these games look fantastic. I would love to play them. But actually, I don't want to get involved in all of that violence. I love that Nintendo don't do that.
Nintendo was pioneer of video game quality consoles. I mean, it essentially rewrote the video game console business model and saved the video game industry by doing so. It was a pioneer in game design. Its attention to the feel of video game mechanics really kind of upped the quality bar. Game designers back in the 80s were not that great. They would make these punishing games that, would make children cry they were so hard. Whereas Nintendo's like, no, a game should be fair. And it seems very obvious to us now that a game should be enjoyable, not punishing, but that's not how people were making games back then. It was a pioneer in broadening out the video game audience with the Wii and the DS. Nintendo created the handheld game. We play iPhone games and Android games now, but before smartphones came along, we were playing on Nintendo portables. But it's a company that's really defined video games throughout its history. It's had an enormous shaping influence on it, and it's still going strong today. It's still setting the tone for a lot of companies. Valve's Steam Deck is quite clearly modelled on the Nintendo Switch in lots of ways. There's no escaping it.
I think Nintendo brings up feelings of nostalgia because, well, first of all, I think it's been around longer, and when Nintendo was in its early days, it was marketing games for children. But even now, kids, their first console was very often a Nintendo console. I mean, my nephews, they all have Nintendo Switches, so their nostalgia will extend to Mario, as plenty of older gamers does as well. But I think it's because, again, at the heart of every Nintendo game is that childlike curiosity and wonder at the world. That's really what makes their games sing.
Well, particularly for people of my age, we grew up with Nintendo. I'm the perfect age to have been swept up by Nintendo's ascendancy in the 1980s, and it's absolutely an indelible part of my childhood.
I think because it's tied into that feeling of childhood fun, it really just evokes a feeling of nostalgia in a lot of people, and especially people my age.
Nintendo's most important legacy is saving the video game console industry. After Atari's collapse, it was possible that game consoles would not come back. It did look like home computers would be where people played games on. Nintendo changed that. Nintendo said, no, there is still room for consoles. If Nintendo hadn't come along when they did, we'd probably all be playing on PCs at this point.
Nintendo has a remarkable philosophy to put smiles on the faces of everyone they touch. To this remarkable company, which started from humble beginnings, making consoles isn't about how much processing power they possess. It is about the stories themselves. It is about the characters and open-mindedness of all who play. To Nintendo, it is all about fun. Nothing more, nothing less.